Sorry about that. So welcome back to session 3C, Vulnerable Road User Safety. We have 3 great presentations today. So I'll start over Priyanka's introduction. Sorry, Priyanka. Priyanka joined Parachute in 2022 and supports their elementary road safety program, Vision Zero, and other road safety programs. She holds a Master of Arts degree and an honors bachelor degree of Health Science from both from the University of Western Ontario. Priyanka brings with her 4 years of health promotion experience. As the community program lead at Sprint Senior Care, Priyanka developed, implemented, monitored, and evaluated 4 community grants to improve overall health and well-being of older adults. She has experience collaborating with community partners to implement evidence-based health promotion intervention through her work on the Healthy Schools program at Hastings Prince Edward Public Health. Priyanka is passionate about advocating for and creating spaces designed to prevent negative outcomes and promote positive health behaviors. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Should I use the headset? Yes. Do you want the speaker? Okay. Did you want to put it just over here? Yeah, can you guys, yep, okay, you guys can hear me. Okay, perfect. Correct. Hi, everybody. So my name is Priyanka Patil, and I'm from Parachute, Canada. And I'm going to be presenting on all-terrain vehicle policy in Canada, gaps and opportunities for injury prevention. So on average, 100 Canadians are killed and more than 2,000 are hospitalized each year due to all-terrain vehicle injuries. The vast majority of victims are male, and Canadians of all ages are affected by ATV injuries. In 2018, off-road vehicle fatalities accounted for 8% of transportation injuries and deaths. Rollovers are the top mechanism of death nationally. Rollovers and flips contribute to 45% of ATV deaths. In some regions, sorry, excuse me. Some regions such as Alberta, the percentage of attributable to rollovers and crashes, in some regions such as Alberta, the percentage of attributable rollovers and crashes, injuries are higher than the 45%. Collisions and ejections or falls are the other top mechanisms that we are seeing, as well as head and neck injuries are the most common causes of death. There are several risk factors noted in the literature that can cause injuries and fatalities. So children and youth under the age of 16 have been identified at a higher risk of being injured from ATV vehicles. This may be due to inexperience, inadequate physical size and strength, immaturity for motor and cognitive development, and tending to engage in risk-taking behavior, which all compounds to the increased risk for children and youth operating ATVs. As we saw in the fatality data, males are overrepresented. This may be also more likely to be cause severe injuries. Elevated risk is likely due to increased exposure and higher frequency of riding. Not wearing a helmet or not safely wearing a helmet was reported in 33% of ATV fatalities. So we're seeing, compared to motorcycle and bicycles, we're seeing lower helmet wearing behavior in the data there as well. Just try, sorry, oops. There we go. So conditions such as dangerous surfaces or slopes and curves were reported in 33% of ATV fatalities. There's a risk of riders using these vehicles on terrains that are not designed for them, such as paved roadways.
Alcohol, drug use was reported in 51% of ATV driving fatalities. And injuries risk is associated with certain risky behaviors such as speeding, stunting, riding at night, and carrying multiple passengers. So our goal was to identify effective solutions that can be implemented through policy, regulation, and standards in order to inform policymakers of all levels. So this was our approach. So ATV policies are at the provincial and territorial level and vary across jurisdictions. We started with a scan of provincial and territorial legislation to understand the opportunities for improvement and harmonization. We reviewed Canadian data on ATV injuries and literature on injury and prevention. We held 4 virtual meetings with stakeholders from injury prevention, trauma, healthcare, industry, rider associations, and enforcement. Consensus was reached and priorities and final recommendations were created. We also identified areas for policy regulation where more information is needed to make recommendations. So now I'm going to briefly go over the findings and all the recommendations that came out of this project. So first off, all provinces and territories currently mandate adult supervision for children and youth to some extent, but supervision needs to be better defined across the board. We recommend that the following definition be put forward. So the definition is the continuous attention of an adult for at least that is at least 18 years or older, who has an unobstructed view of the rider that is within maximum 15 meters of distance of a child or youth operating an ATV. The second recommendation related to safety equipment is that all provinces and territories should mandate the use of helmets, footwear, gloves, and eye protection. The third related to training, all provinces and territories should mandate ATV riders to complete age-appropriate ATV safety training with certified training instructors. Training should include knowledge-based as well as skill-based practical components. The fourth recommendation related to passengers, operators should only be used to carry passengers if the ATV is manufactured for passengers, with the added consideration for young passengers being large enough to fit properly on an ATV. So this is being able to hold the foot pegs and grasp the handlebars and sit down fully in the passenger seat. Our fifth recommendation related to enforcement. So strategies to improve enforcement of ATV safety should be developed and supported, and public awareness of ATV safety should be raised. The impact of enforcement on the effectiveness of legislation should also be emphasized. Our sixth recommendation is related to on-road operation. So all ATVs or all provinces and territories should mandate a minimum age to drive on roads and highways where ATVs are permitted. That is no less than the age at which a driver's license can be awarded in the province. So that depending on the province, it could be anywhere from 14 to 16 years of age. And so our seventh recommendations related to speed. So all provinces and territories should mandate that ATV riders ride only on designated roads and trails at specific speed restrictions. Our eighth is related to substance use. All provinces and territories should continue to prohibit the operation of an ATV while under the influence of substances. 9 is related to regulation. All provinces and territories should mandate ATV regulation, and funding should be used to be put towards education, rail improvements, and as well enforcement. And then our 10th recommendation is related to driver's licensing. So all provinces and territories should mandate that ATV operators hold a valid driver license for road and highways where an ATV is permitted to drive or cross. And then related to age appropriateness in passengers. So there are a few, it might seem a little confusing, but I'll try to go through it a little slowly because depending on your age, there's certain passenger requirements and so on. So all provinces and territories should prohibit anyone from the under age of 12 from ever riding an ATV at all. And then we should also mandate a minimum age of 12 to ride as a passenger on an ATV, provided that the operator is 16 years or older and the ATV is manufactured to carry a passenger. As well, provinces and territories should mandate a minimum age of 14 to operate an ATV both on private and public land, provided that they are supervised as defined in recommendation 1 and comply with all other requirements. Provinces and territories should also mandate a minimum age of 16 to operate an ATV on public and private land without supervision, provided that they comply with all other safety requirements. And the last one is all passengers or all provinces and territories should also prohibit operators under the age of 16 from carrying a passenger on both private and public land unless the passenger is an adult of at least 18 years or older who has completed safety training and the ATV is manufactured for carrying a passenger. Our 12th recommendation is related to the size of the ATV. All all provinces and territories should mandate that the operator of ATVs be comfortably able to reach and operate all the controls. The following is intended usage categories are defined by the American National Standard Institute standards for four-wheel all-terrain vehicles. So under category Y12 plus, ATVs intended for use by children that are 12 and older, with a maximum speed capacity range of 24 kilometers per hour to 48 kilometers per hour. And category T transition models, ATVs intended for use by operators who are 14 and older, also under the supervision of adults with a maximum speed capacity range of 32 kilometers per hour to 61 kilometers per hour. And finally, the last recommendation was related to crash protection devices, also known as CPDs. There's some early evidence of CPD's efficacy in recreational settings, but this is still an emerging area of research. More evidence is needed in order to conclude that CPDs are effective in reaching recreational activities. There's more evidence for CPD efficacy in agricultural and industrial settings. Policymakers should continue to monitor the state of CPD research as the evidence develops. We recommend looking at jurisdictions where CPD's installation is mandated for the legal selling of new and used ATVs, such as Australia, as a hub for key evidence. So some opportunities for further investigation were accessing data for off-road vehicles and injuries more directly separated by vehicle type. So having that more specific data related to ATV collisions. Understanding how many ATV users are in Canada. There is excellent data on the sales, but not really the usage. Thus, we can't really understand the relationship between exposure and injury rates. Evidence is lacking on whether youth-sized ATVs are safer for children, so more evidence is really needed there as well. Evidence is lacking also on evaluation for training programs. So how effective are they at improving knowledge, changing behavior, and what types of training is more effective? Finally, as already mentioned, further evaluation of crash protection devices in recreational or personal use settings is significantly of interest to inform public regulation. Lastly, we'd like to acknowledge Transportation Canada for funding this project. We thank our partners, the Canadian Collaboration Centre for Injury Prevention and the Trauma Association of Canada Injury Prevention Committee. We acknowledge our collaborators, the Canadian Pediatric Society, Canadian Quad Council, RCMP, OPP, and the Canadian Off-Highway Vehicle Distribution Council. Thank you guys very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions. If I'm not able to answer your question, I'm happy to forward that to my colleagues, Pam and Steph, who are actually the co-authors of this paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Priyanka. Any questions from the audience?
Was it looked at all to see if the amount of exposure a child had would diminish the amount of risk? Because like I'm thinking of, you see ATVs that are like 75cc or 90s that are very small. So if we're thinking kids shouldn't drive before 12, why are those even being made? But having them made, if a child is using them for a long period of exposure, does that mean that they're less at risk of collision or fatalities? Like, does that ever been looked at?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if that's been looked at. I know that when they were looking at the age groups, they wanted it to be a graduated approach instead of just being 16, where you have like the 14-year-old like getting up there to slowly learn and having that adult supervision to like get them used to riding one instead of just at 16. So that's why there's that graduated approach.
And are they looking at the 70 to 90 cc? Because those are electric. So I don't know if that comes under like a whole other base, because they're still going 20 kilometers an hour, if not more. So it's kind of, you know, like we're telling kids not to ride before 12, but they're too big for these. You know, like those are made for kids that are younger age. It's kind of, it's conflicting that those are even being made. If that's being looked at, I don't know.
I'm not sure, but it's thanks. Yeah.
Just to let you know, I'm Wayne Daub, and although I'm here with the Motorcyclists Confederation of Canada, I'm also the general manager for the Canadian Quad Council. So I'm one of the folks that helped with creating this study. And when it comes to children under the age of 12, yes, the machines are made. Yes, there's more than Canadian market, so they do them elsewhere. But our study really focused on the cognitive ability on most children under the age of 12 to be able to know what to do under circumstances where they could get themselves into trouble. And yes, I also agree with you that most ATVs built for 90cc or 50cc don't match the child. My child, when she was 12 years old, was 6'3", weighed 180 pounds. To put her on a 90cc ATV, I'd have to hook her knees over her ears so she could steer it. So it never made sense. And if you notice, we didn't use that in our report. We used appropriately sized ATV. So that's not necessarily the manufacturer's recommendation. That's the recommendation of the parent to understand what their child could actually properly control.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Priyanka.
Thank you.
So our next presenter is Zara Ghayeninezhad. Zara works as a research assistant at the University of Quebec. She holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in highway and transportation engineering. Her thesis focuses on vulnerable road user safety. Zara is currently involved in a project aimed at improving the safety of motorcyclists. So welcome, Zara.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. Today, I'm going to present our paper titled Safety Interventions for Motorcyclists, a Systematic Literature Review. Unfortunately, each year in around 30% of road fatalities, we have the motorcyclists, and that is a huge number of 300,000 each year around the world. In Canada, in 2020, 40% of road fatalities belong to motorcyclists. And although we had a decrease in the number of road fatalities in 2020, we had increase in the number of motorcyclist road fatalities in this year. In Quebec, we had 67 deaths of the motorcyclists in this year. When we talk about law enforcement for the motorcyclist, the first subject in everyone's mind is helmet use. There are studies that shows helmet use can reduce the injuries in case that the accident happened. And many drivers, whether they use helmet or not, are convinced with the benefits of the helmet used. Law enforcement, voluntary campaigns, and many other programs had been effective in convincing people with the helmet use. But in this study, we are going to escape the helmet use, and you can ask like at the end, why? There are other subjects for the safety of the motorcyclists, and that is training. There are two categories of training. The first one is pre-license training, and that has been mandatory since 1990s. There are some criticism about this pre-license training that says, although they are necessary, they are not enough yet. And in some cases, because drivers have no experience since they have the pre-license training, they may skip some information as unnecessary during this course. There are another idea of post-license training, and we are not yet confirmed with the effectiveness of this post-license training, and we are not even yet confirmed with the best method to perform a post-license training for the motorcyclists. So in this systematic literature review, we are aiming to fill the gap that exists in the effectiveness of these post-license interventions for the safety of the motorcyclist. We also are looking at both short-term and long-term effects of this interventions. And also we are looking at different type of data collection method that can have different assessments of the effectiveness of these interventions. I have a quick review of our methodology. At the first step, we create our question by PICO framework suggested by Richardson that has 4 segments. The first segment is population, and we had motorcyclists in general. The interventions, as you can see, could be post-license courses, safety campaigns, etc. A control group with the same characteristics of the intervention group with the same age, gender, driving experience characteristics, and our outcome of interest was changes in accident frequency, accident deaths, injuries, near misses, and violations of the motorcyclist on the road, and also speed, which is the most important surrogate measure in the safety of the motorcyclist, as well as subjective measures in riding and driving performance. In the second step, we searched PubMed with the keywords that we had for our systematic literature review, and we found 407 papers from 2000 until 2021. That was the beginning of our project. After that, in the third steps, 2 independent reviewed all 407 papers abstract, and with some exclusion criteria, we found 25 papers relevant to the subject. In the next step, again, we had a full review on all papers, and we came finally with 5 relevant high quality papers. So in the last step, we compared all the papers in terms of their interventions, the population, the level of their effectiveness, the time gap they had between interventions, and the effectiveness evaluation. So here you can see these 5 papers that were selected for the systematic literature review. You can also see quality score that 2 reviewers gave to this score. They were all high quality in the subjects. As the first category of our outcome, that is accident frequency, deaths, injury, near misses, and violations, you can see the first paper used on-road data for data collections, and this paper reported that their intervention was effective after 4 years. That is a long period. The second paper used both on-road and test and questionnaire method, but as you can see, they have diverse effectiveness in different time periods and in different level of data collections. The second outcome that we considered was speed management, and we had 3 papers focusing on this outcome. The first paper used simulator for data collection, and they also had diverse level of effectiveness. For example, they could modify the driver's behavior in high zone speed, but it has diverse effect on the driver's behavior in low speed zones. The second paper and third one used on-road and both test and questionnaire method for data collection, and they both were effective in the first one in 4 months and the second ones both in 3 months and 12 months after the intervention. The third outcome was subjective measures in riding, and we had 3 papers. The first one used test and questionnaire, and they evaluated their interventions 3 months after the interventions, and they reported their intervention as effective. The next 2 used both on-road and test and questionnaire, and both reported that their intervention was effective after a really short period after their intervention. The last but not the least was changes or modifying driving performance of the riders, and we also had 3 papers here in this category. The first one used self-reported test and questionnaire method, and they reported that their intervention was effective after 3 months. The second paper used simulator, and they reported also that their intervention was effective. And the last paper used both on-road and test and questionnaire method, but the intervention was ineffective. In the first part of our discussion of this systematic literature review, we are talking about the subjects that we are confirmed with the effects of them on the riders. So what we can suggest here is that knowledge of the traffic signs should be recovered after years of having driving license. Also, hazard perceptions and anticipating the dangers should be improved for the experienced drivers, because after the years, they may have a different experience of driving. They may face over self-confidence. So we can improve their hazard perceptions with the training. On the contrary, focusing on the driving abilities may imply that drivers do not necessarily should avoid dangers on the road because they are convinced that they have more ability comparing to the normal drivers. In the second part of our discussion, we focused on the recommendations for the researchers that do the same interventions and they are going to report their interventions. As you can see, the same interventions can have different level of effectiveness during the time. Some of the results that we have in short-term assessment are disappear in long-term assessment. So a significant time gap between the intervention and the assessment is recommended. The next item is a control group. In some cases, when we perform an intervention, there are some other out of control interventions that may affect the intervention group. So having a control group with the same age and characteristics, such as driving experience of the intervention group is very recommended to have the pure assessment of our interventions. And as you can see, some of the data collection method for the same intervention has the different level of effectiveness. Actually, on-road data are the most trustable, realistic data collection method, but sometimes they are impossible in real-world data. And in some cases, self-report data is our only option. So we suggest to the researchers that if they are using self-report data, calibrated it with on-road data, at least for a proportion of the participants. As you can see, during 20 years, we had only 5 relevant papers to the subjects. And by considering the importance of the subject, this number is very disappointing. Although we had some other relevant papers relevant to our subjects. Some details in some papers were missed, so we couldn't use them. This could be this could be data on the time gap between the intervention and the assessment. This could be information on the characteristics of the population group. And in some cases, we didn't have enough data about the test, questionnaire, self-reported data, or the instructor that were used for driving simulators. These were the limitations that we had during our systematic literature review. To our knowledge, this study was the first systematic literature review that were focused on post-license training interventions for the motorcyclists. And as we expected, there is a huge capacity in these interventions to improve the safety of the motorcyclists. But at this step, we should emphasize that because of the lack of enough papers on the subjects, we can't conclude what would be the best method for the intervention and the best method for the evaluations. Thank you very much. So fast.
All right. Do we have any questions from the audience? Do we have any questions from the audience? You're welcome. So our next our next presenter is Hanie. Is it? Check. Can you hear me? It's on. Okay. So our next presenter is Hanie. Hanie is a third-year PhD student in the Department of Civil Engineering at McMaster University. She is researching active road users' unsafe behaviors to support the sustainability of the transportation system and is always interested in discussing transportation safety topics. Hanie is the president of the ITE McMaster student chapter, and she hopes that her research positively impacts all people and the communities they live in, especially vulnerable road users. Welcome, Hanie.
Can you hear me? Huh? Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your meal and previous presentation so far, and thank you, Nevada, for the introduction. If any of you experienced this situation at least one time in your life, this presentation is for you. Julia Cameron is a well-known American journalist, which she mentioned a sentence in one of his best-selling books that pray to catch the bus, then run as fast as you can. Okay, it's great. But the bad news is that sometimes pedestrians risk their life in reaching their goal, which is bus in this case, and miss that bus forever. Why? Because they already were hit by a car. There are several types of violation behaviors of pedestrians that increase the risk of their collisions. Based on the literature, these behaviors could be classified into two main categories: temporal violation and spatial violation. If a pedestrian like this gentleman smile at the driver and cross the street during the red light or blinking red light, a temporal violation is happening. On the other hand, if a pedestrian starts to cross the street at somewhere other than the crosswalk, a spatial violation is happening. So based on the definition, let's talk about the pedestrian collision statistics and try to figure out the impact of such unsafe behaviors on the pedestrian collisions. For doing this, we selected the city of Hamilton as a case study. For those of you who are not familiar with this city, the city of Hamilton is located 58 southwest of Toronto and is one of the populated cities in Ontario. This figure compares the proportion of pedestrians involved in road collision in the city of Hamilton and the proportion of pedestrians involved collision due to pedestrian violation in 2 years, 2010 and 2017. As you can see, the gray rectangles shows the proportion of total pedestrian involved collisions, and it has dropped from 7.3% to 6.7% over the 7 years. But more important, the proportion of pedestrian collisions that involved pedestrian unsafe behaviors has increased about 2.4% over the same period of time. This increasing trend shows that we can claim that the pedestrian unsafe behavior could be considered as one of the main contributing factors to their collision. And this graph demonstrates the spatial distribution of the violation-related collisions that occurred in the city of Hamilton. The blue dots are, let's start with the red one. The red dots are the collisions that included violation, and of course, the blue ones are the non-violation related collisions. The point in this figure that motivated me to start to work on this project was that what is the difference between these two colors and how we can convert these red colors to blue ones. I mean, in other words, what are the characteristics of the locations that experience higher frequency of the collisions, including violation, and in comparison with the locations that are safe from violation point of view. And the question is that if we provide the same situation at this higher frequency of the collision based on violation, can we expect that we will see a lower frequency of the violations or not? To answer this question, we developed a three-stage objective. First of all, we developed two full Bayesian models. The first model was applied on total pedestrian involved collisions as general, and the second model was applied just for collisions that happen due to violation. In the next step, based on the result of the full Bayesian model, we tried to identify the hotspot location for both datasets, again, total collision and violation related collision, and rank them based on an indicator which name is PSI. And finally, we developed a machine learning model. Its name is support vector machine, to try to make a distinguish between the collision prone location and non-collision prone locations. To do that, we used 8 years historical collision records of the city of Hamilton from 2010 to 2017. During this period of time, about 2,089 pedestrian involved collision in general will happen, resulted in 45 total collision, fatal collisions, and about 1,800 severe injury collisions. And a quarter of these collisions involved pedestrian violation. In summary, if I want to talk about the contributing factors that we considered in our investigation, they could be classified into 6 classes. For the sake of time, I will not go into the details of each class, but the first 2 ones are related to pedestrian network itself. We also consider 3 types of land use areas, also exposure, some features related to built environment, and socioeconomic were also considered as the input variables for our model. And I need to mention that we developed a macro level analysis. So all of these variables were integrated into zonal level. So let's talk about the result. Based on the two models, based on the two full Bayesian models that we developed, there was a consistency between the impact of the factors on total collisions and violation-related collisions for all variables except 4, which means that if we investigate the total collisions, these 4 factors has positive impact in reducing the severity, the frequency of the collisions. So they are good. But if we focus on the collisions that happen due to pedestrian violation, the impact of this factor will be inverse. So these factors increase or maybe encourage pedestrians to do violation, and they increase the frequency of the collisions that happen due to violation. What are these factors? The first 2 are related to pedestrian network. So the frequency of pedestrian violation collision will be higher at locations that has higher percentage of side bike coverage, and also longer average length of the zonal zonal side bike, and also at locations with denser bus stops and lower frequency of signals. I mean, if a zone level has higher frequency of signalized intersection, the frequency of the violation-related collision will be higher. However, we think that presence of signalized intersection will increase the safety. And in the next step, we identified the collision-prone locations. As you can see in this map, the green dots are the locations that are hotspot location based on total collisions. The blue ones are just the violation-related collisions. And the red ones that are more important for us are the zones that identified as a collision-prone location based on both total collisions and violation-related collisions. So if a decision maker wants to apply some countermeasures at this location, I think the blue dots, the red dots are more important for them. And in the final steps, we developed the SVM model as a supervised machine learning technique to distinguish between the hotspot location and non-hotspot location. For total pedestrian collisions, we identified 5 more important, the highest influential factors that distinguish between the hotspot and non-hotspot. These are intersection density, signal density, household density, and the 2 factors that considered as the exposure. And for the violation involved collisions, the intersection density and signal density are the same, but pedestrian network complexity, bus stop density, and 2 land use areas, institutional and office, were considered for violation-related collisions. So in summary, intersection density was identified as the most important factors that contribute pedestrians to do violation, and it will increase the frequency of the violation-related collision. If we want to identify the hotspot location, pedestrian network indicators and land use play the most important role. And if any of you are a decision maker and want to apply a countermeasure in the city of Hamilton, I would recommend you to consider the locations that has poor network density for pedestrians and give priority to these locations. And so we identified the important factors, and we know where are we now. So what is the next step? For the next step, I believe that the result of our study showed a good starting point for identifying that or recognizing that the violation unsafe behavior has a crucial impact on their collision. So we need to develop other advanced technique to identify the collision-prone zones and validate our results. The next one is to try to add more variables like car ownership or income to investigate the economical aspect of the life and its impact on pedestrians' behavior. And the last one is the issue of transferability. We just considered the data set that happened in the city of Hamilton. How about the other cities? When we apply the same technique on the other cities, we can identify the impact of social norms and culture on the pedestrians' behaviors. And we could find that, is there any culture in Canada, for example, that encourage pedestrians to violate? And for sure, we can work on them. So as the last slide, the result of this study was a small part of a larger project that is sponsored by Ministry of Transportation of Ontario, and my supervisor, Dr. Hossein, and I worked on it. And as the last point, I want to come back to this slide and ask you from now on, whenever you want to cross the street, pray for yourself before praying to catch the bus. So I'm here if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions? Oh.
Thank you. I was kind of a little bit confused, and maybe you can just clarify this, or maybe someone else in the room has experience with it. But you showed that the areas that had higher density of pedestrians had the highest number of collisions, which at first made sense because more people, more opportunity for the numbers to be higher. But when we're looking at our hotspots in order to determine where to put our road safety initiatives, what we have seen is, or what we've assumed, is that when there are more pedestrians, that the motorists actually are expecting pedestrians so that they are more careful and more alert. And in areas where there's less density of pedestrians, you have more potential for a pedestrian to be struck because the motorists are not expecting them. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the opposite of what you're showing here. And I'm just wondering if you have any explanation for that, other than the fact that more people, more potential, but that doesn't really lend itself to identifying the hotspots.
Okay, if I understand your question, you are talking about the pedestrian exposure and the impact of the pedestrian exposure on the collision, right? At locations with higher frequency of pedestrians, we will expect higher frequency of collision. As I understand.
What we look at is, I know it's noise from the other room. When we look at our hotspots, we look at the areas where, and maybe our Peel police officer here can refute what I'm saying, but you know, we look at areas that there's more potential for a collision with a pedestrian if the driver is not expecting to see pedestrians. Mm-hmm. And the driver, you know, in a downtown core, for example, where you have a lot of pedestrians, there theoretically should be fewer collisions with pedestrians because the motorists are more alert. But your numbers are showing that it's higher where there are more pedestrians. So okay, I just confused you on that, didn't I?
I think the result of my study is in line with what you are saying, because I am seeing this collision from pedestrian point of view, not drivers. So violation is an intentional behavior. So regardless of the exposure, regardless of their road infrastructure or any other things, we need to increase the safety awareness of pedestrians. So, and also, as you said, in downtown that we see higher collision. You said that we will see lower collision in downtown, but in downtown, people are less or careless about the riding or walking, because they are pretty sure that they can cross the street or catch the bus other than the other side of the cities. I can't see any inverse result between this, but we can discuss it after our meeting. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just a quick question. Did you consider age in looking at pedestrian collisions? And in particular, what I'm thinking of are children and seniors who would be presumably at greater risk of pedestrian collision.
Yeah, actually, I did not consider the age for this study, but for my other studies that I wanted to identify the hotspot intersections in the city of Hamilton, yes, I considered the age, but children no were in the safe side, but seniors, the people who were above 65 years, yes, they were in dangerous age group. Yeah, but children, no, they were not.
Any other questions? Okay.
Sorry, I didn't hear. The gray area. The gray area, the above one is the downtown area in the city of Hamilton, and the above one is the mountain area. I just wanted to show the red zones. Most of them are in downtown area, mountain area, the zone that is in front of McMaster, below the McMaster University, and the small part of Stony Creek. They are dangerous zones in the city of Hamilton.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much, Hanie. And that's the end of session 3C today. Thank you very much again for joining. In lieu of a speaker gift, a donation of $30 has been given to the Cause for Young Professionals Committee on behalf of the speakers who spoke today. Have a good afternoon and enjoy the rest of the conference.